You're feeling a little needy. Are you gonna lay down right there? That seems like a terrible spot to lay down. Hi kids, welcome to another pizza party. I'm Mrs. Pizza. This is Winnie. This is Fergie. Mika is back there. She's laying up there and I have no idea where Cheese is right now, which should probably worry me, but at this point there are so many dogs in my house. It's fine. There's also another bird here. It's fine. We're doing great. We're actually all kind of calming down right now. Fergie is like obsessed with licking Winnie's face. I need to Google what this is about because Fergie is just constantly licking Winnie's mouth and her eyes and her ears. I like to think that it's that she just thinks she's the best, just like I do. We are here today to do another recent reads. Why? Because if I wait too long, it's too many books and it's overwhelming. So I like to do this while it's a little bit shorter. So we are gonna briefly talk about some books that I read. We are actually, I'm not really caught up. I was about to lie to you. I was about to lie straight to your face and tell you that I'm caught up. I'm not even close to being caught up. But some of these books I was reading back in December, that is how far behind on my recent reads I am. So let's just get into it. I'm gonna try and keep this as brief as possible with most of these books because, well, one, I got somewhere to be, but two, I know nobody wants to hear me talk that long. All right, the first book we are going to talk about is The Raven and the Reindeer, and this is by t.kingfisher. I am a huge t.kingfisher fan. That is something that you should know about me if you've watched any of my videos. I really, really enjoy their fantasy books. I enjoy their horror books. I enjoy them as an author. And this was me going back and reading something I honestly could not remember if I had read this one before. I was pretty positive that I had read the majority of t.kingfisher's backlist, but for some reason, I think I missed this book somewhere. So you are on my foot and you're bending it weird. Ow. So I decided to pick this one up because it was cold outside. This is a reimagining, retelling of The Snow Queen by Hans Christian Andersen. This is taking a lot of liberties and using the framework of that story to tell a very different story. But that is what I really like about t.kingfisher, is how they are able to add new themes and stories within the framework of an existing story and their retellings. This is the story of Goethe, and she lives next door to her best friend Kay. They have both grown up together. Their grandmothers are best friends. They've known each other since they were infants, and Goethe is a much better friend to Kay than Kay is to her, hands down. But one day, Kay is kidnapped, lured away by the Snow Queen, and Goethe goes on an adventure to save her best friend. What I really enjoy about t.kingfisher stories is this author's ability to give the main character role to a less traditional character. Goethe is different. She's not the most beautiful, she's not the most heroic, but she has a really big heart and she is going to save her best friend. And also, this book and a lot of t.kingfisher's book have this underlying darkness that a lot of fairy tales that you read as a child also had. There's an underlying sinister, dark, creepy things happening. It's not all rainbows and unicorns. In this story, there's a lot of nostalgia that is going to make or break this for you. This feels like the kind of story that you would have found in a storybook that your grandparents had about fairy tales. You know, the ones where Cinderella doesn't just like ride off into the sunset, but her stepmother and her stepsisters end up being murdered for their crimes and cutting off their feet to fit in shoes. Some of these fairy tales are much, much darker before they were kind of cleaned up and repackaged for the newer generations. And this story has a lot of that feeling to it. I think there's like a nostalgia for something you haven't actually read before, but it gives you those nostalgic feelings for something that's similar to something you would have experienced as a child if you read those kind of darker, older fairy tales. I really enjoyed this. I don't think everybody's going to enjoy this. I think if you don't like things that feel dark fairy tale, and not that this is necessarily super dark, it just has that darker edge that older fairy tales do. If that's not something you usually jive with, I don't think you'll like this, but I enjoyed it. I had a great time. I enjoyed it, and I think I ended up giving it 4 stars. Excuse me, Winnie. The next book I picked up after that was The Witcher, The Sword of Destiny. This is the second book. I think this is like 0.75. I've read 0.5, which is The Last Wish, I think. I've read the first 2 books before you start reading the series. My Goodreads review for this was like, wow, now that I've read 2 books, I can start reading the books. This is a continuation of these little vignettes, stories of Geralt, our Witcher, Yennefer, our Sorcerer, and Ciri, our our child, our child of destiny. If you liked the first season of the Witcher TV show, I only ever watched the first season. I feel like I can't reach for it right now because Winnie is literally laying across my legs and I don't have the mobility to get to the book. But that's basically the first book and a little bit into this book that is established within the first season. It's aware of itself. Geralt is very sarcastic. He's a reluctant hero in some instances. Yennefer is a free spirit, but she's had a very tragic beginning. These books are they're fine. I like them. I'm going to keep going. And now that I've read 2 books, I can start reading the books, you know? The next book I picked up after that was Christmas and Other Horrors. This is an anthology series that I picked up while I was on vacation. And I think this is actually my first anthology series that I've ever completed. I don't think I've ever read an anthology, which makes 0 sense, but this was a good place to start. Like I assume most anthologies are, there were some stories in this that really worked for me and some others that didn't. There wasn't anything that I just objectively hated. Like there wasn't anything where I was like, that was awful. Everything was satisfactory, some more than others. There was a few authors that I had read from before in this and some that I hadn't. And now that there's a few people that I'm going to seek out other works from them after reading this. This is a collection of short stories, all involving horror elements that deal with things happening around the winter solstice and holidays that take place in the winter time. There's a varying degree of length. There's a varying degree of what kind of horror they are. Honestly, I will say the first story in this book was one of the ones that worked the absolute best for me, which is funny because I feel like that's probably what they put at the very beginning. And that was The Importance of a Tidy Home by Christopher Golden. I really enjoyed that one. Let's see if there's any other ones in here that I marked as like The Blessings of the Waters by Nick Mamatas. That one, I don't know why that one really got to me. That one, I really can't give you a synopsis of what these stories are about because they're so short. Oh, and Loyally Sauna, which is by Josh Mallerman, who is the same author that wrote Bird Box. Those are just a few. I really enjoyed most of the stories in here. If you like quick, scary, spooky things and you wanted to read something that had to do with wintry / Christmassy / solstice and Hanukkah and Kwanzaa and all of these different cultures, their cryptids and lore around this kind of time of year, this was a fun ride. I'm glad I read it. The next book I picked up after that was the finale to a duology. I read Two Twisted Crowns, and this is by Rachel Gillig. The first book in this series is One Dark Window, and this one is following a character named Elsbeth who lives in a fantasy world that is surrounded by this spooky woods and this eerie mist. And there are 2 kind of forms of magic going on. There is a form of magic that has to do with a deck of cards that imbues the card holder with specific powers based on the cards. But there is also an illness in this world, and if you contract this illness, one of 2 things happens. 1, you die. The end. 2, you survive and you develop some sort of magical ability. Everyone's magical ability seems to be different, case specific, but our main character Elsbeth contracted this illness as a child, was hidden and secreted away and survived and has no outwardly signs of magic, so her family thinks she's safe. Now, one of the things you also need to know about this world is all of the people that contract this illness are now suddenly illegal. They are to be executed by the king because to have this kind of magic is illegal. So if you are found out to be sick or harboring someone that is sick, you get in a whole heap of trouble. So Elsbeth has to keep her magical abilities that she has, even though no one knows she has them, a secret. And her magic ability basically is tied to this monster that she calls the Nightmare that is squatting on her brain. They have a lot of commentary going on, talking back and forth, but she's the only one that can hear him and the only one that knows he's there. There's political intrigue, there's a little bit of romance happening. This was a generally good time. I went into this with 0 expectations, and I think that was the right thing to do because I feel like a lot of people really enjoyed this, and then when people hear the hype, they're expecting something over the the top and wild and crazy. It's fine. I liked it. I had fun with it. But I will say, I liked this one better. I actually enjoyed the sequel better because even though there is a love story and main characters in this, your focus is very different in this book. There's a different couple that the seeds were planted in this book, and they are now kind of our main romance through line in this one. Although we still have our two main characters from the main book, we're still dealing with repercussions of what happened at the end of the first book. I found personally, I enjoyed the romance in the two main focuses. They're still the main focuses, the main points of view from the first book, but this one we get more points of view, and those new additions were I liked them better. That's how we'll put them. I jived better with this one. How about that? This duology is now complete. It's not going to change the world, but it was a fun time, and I enjoyed the magic system in this. I thought it was really interesting. It's spooky, dark fantasy with a romance happening. The next book I picked after that is available on Kindle Unlimited, and that is Brewed in Magic, and this is Falling for Fables #2 by Jenna Wolfhart. This is the first book in this series is Forged by Magic, which was marketed as a cozy type fantasy. I guess you could say it's cozy. It's cozier. It is the story of a half-orc who is imprisoned by an ice king. He dangles her freedom in front of her. He says, hey, go do this thing for me and you won't be my prisoner anymore. And so she is a reluctant mercenary who is doing a thing that she doesn't necessarily want to do in order to gain her freedom. She ends up on this magical small island with this small town feeling full of all these magical creatures, and she meets a super grumpy and attractive blacksmith. But it's more low, I keep wanting to say it's lower stakes because it definitely feels cozier, but there are still major stakes happening. There's an evil king, there's people who are being persecuted, there is possible murders going to happen. It's cozy-ish. Brewed in Magic is following the sister of the main character, our grumpy blacksmith from the first book, and she, I think her name was Lila, but don't hold me to that. For some reason, Goodreads will not let me look up what her name is right now. But she has a traveling tavern. So she travels from small town to small town on this island that she lives on, going to different festivals and markets, selling her ale. Now, she has been wildly successful and has a lovely little personality. Well, one day when she is traveling to this big market that she is counting on to help make some money because she wants to continue this lifestyle and pennies be tight. She's having to pinch her purse. She's in need of funds. And so as she's traveling to this market, she along the way meets a super handsome, good-looking guy, and they have an instant connection. Now, in the morning when she wakes up after he helps her, I think get her wagon unstuck or something, totally fantasy romance meet cute moment, he's gone, he's moved on. But when she makes it to the market the following day, not only does she find out this person she had an instant connection with, he might be a rival, but he might have known he was a rival from the beginning. This is touted as like enemies to lovers. This is enemies to lovers light. This is rivals for 5 seconds, and then we have to team up to solve a mystery of something that's happening at the market. I found this one to be much more cozy than the first one, and I don't know why. Maybe because the stakes were just things that were happening to our main characters instead of stakes being, you know, empires falling. It was really sweet. If you like books like Legends and Lattes, but you want them to, or Bookshops and Bone Dust, but you want them to be much more romance forward, I would say these fit the bill. These actually feel much more like cozy fantasy romance, but they really lean into the cozy fantasy. The next book I picked up after that, excuse me, Winnie, sorry, was actually a reread for me, and that was SwordHeart by t.kingfisher. I was having a t.kingfisher moment, and I needed the dopamine kick that is this book for me. This is one of my favorite books. It's not perfect, but it's damn near close. I also re-listened to the audiobook while I read this one. I love the audiobook for this one. Let me tell you what this book is about. This is a fantasy romance, and you are following a housekeeper named Hala who has come into a fortune when her late husband's uncle, who she was the caretaker for, has passed away. He left all of his money to Hala, and his family is not having it. So they have locked Hala in in a room and they're like, you gotta marry this cousin and keep the money in the family or we're never letting you out. And so Hala is like, absolutely not. He has clammy hands, he's gross, and he has no spine. I will not marry him. I will not marry back into this awful family. And so in a moment of desperation, she unsheathes a sword and a man pops out. And the man in the sword is Sarkis. He's the servant of the sword, and he has been in the sword for a very, very long time. Now he is bound to protect Hala because she is the wielder of his sword. And they go on an adventure to free Hala from the clutches of this family. This is cozy in that we do go on an adventure. There is a road trip element to this, but we're only really saving Hala. It's not the end of the world. It's one person and the found family and the banter and kind of dealing with villains who are villains, but they're not trying to take over the world. They're just trying to ruin Hala's life. This is so freaking cute. I love it. It's funny. I love Hala. I love how she weaponizes some of the things that are, I would say, like, what is the word for it? She weaponizes a lot of the things that are prejudices used against her. One of the things that she weaponizes is that no one wants to hurt a stupid woman. They just want to kick them to the side. And so she uses this dizzying speak and acting like she's a bumbling, fumbling woman to really get them out of some tight spots. She's so clever without realizing how clever she is. She's paying attention and she's learned how to work the system. I love Hala. I love Sarkis. And the end of this book, they kind of set it up for a sequel, but no sequel exists. And I need it. I need it for my heart and my life. I love this book. And it was time for a reread. So there you go. The next book I picked up after that was Paladins Faith, which is the fourth book in the Saints of Steel series by t.kingfisher. This was a Fergie. This was a t.kingfisher moment that I was having. I really like their books and I needed it. The Saints of Steel is a fantasy romance series that this author is independently publishing. It is following a group of paladins who used to, for lack of a better way of putting it, they used to work for a berserker type god. This god would pick them and they would become these berserker warriors imbued by the power of the gods. So they would go into battle and this thing called the Black Tide rises and they just go bananas and become super soldier warrior over the top. Well, one day the god died. Nobody knows why the god died. Nobody knows what happened, but it just threw this entire god's clergy, for lack of a better way of putting it, all of its followers into a complete upheaval. And so in this series, we are following several of the survivors of the god dying who are now just trying to put their life back together. They have ended up at the Temple of the White Rat, which is another temple / religious order in this world that is really about philanthropy and giving legal representation to people who need it. How gods and religions are portrayed in this world is very interesting, but they've ended up at the Temple of the White Rat, and each book follows an individual paladin from the Saints of Steel as they find love and move on with life. The first book in this series, which is Paladin's Grace, is and was my favorite of all of the books. I feel like some of these have been more hits and some of them have been a little bit of a miss. And Paladins Faith, it wasn't a miss. I ended up giving it 3 stars, but my biggest criticism for this, and I actually read this while I was doing a reading vlog and I'll link that one. This book, I think, was not successful for me because I didn't enjoy the romantic element to it. And this is a fantasy romance, so I don't think it was successful. That being said, I actually enjoyed the story that was going on. I loved the found family. I was really invested in some of the side characters for this, but I didn't really love the romance that was happening. Now, in this book, we are following Marguerite, and she is a super spy. Well, I personally do not think she was a super spy. I think we were told she was a super spy a whole bunch, but I don't think anything she did was very super spy. That's beside the point. In this book, we have Marguerite, and she is one of the friends of Grace, our character from our first book. So she's a character you've been introduced to in the past, and she has shown back up again at the Temple of the White Rat, and she needs help because she's found some intel and this could change the world. So she's gone to the White Rat for help. The White Rat then gives her 2 paladins from the Saint of Steel. We have Shane and Ren, and they are going to accompany Marguerite to this court of shadows to do some espionage spy things. Shane is a leader within the Paladins. He is depressed and lonely and still struggling from the death of his god. And Ren is the youngest Paladin in this group, and she is 5'4", and I think she's like 23. And all of these other Paladins sound like they're big, huge men, and Ren is just this little cannonball of fury when the black tide takes her. She has grown up for the most part in this group of Paladins, and so she basically has 100 older brothers, and so she's lived a very sheltered existence. And that's what makes Ren my favorite, because she is not worldly, but she doesn't come across as necessarily naive. She just hasn't been exposed to things. She's open-minded. She just hasn't seen these things before. And so there's a lot of fun in that when they're talking about things happen, and Ren's eyes get big, and she's like, wait a minute. That's something that can happen, and it just keeps happening over and over again. Also, the fact that she's this teeny tiny, I can't say teeny tiny because I'm probably 5'3", so Ren's a whole inch taller than me. I say I'm 5'3", I'm probably 5'2". We're not gonna talk about it. Ren is just this absolute super warrior, but yet is short and not traditionally pretty and lives a sheltered life, but yet you can't help but love her. I like this fantasy romance series. I like this author. I'm probably going to keep reading, especially if Ren gets her own book. Although with the ending of this book, I don't know if Ren is going to get her own book, but it doesn't seem like her book will be next in what is planned for the series with the setup that is at the end of this book. But I read it, and I'm gonna keep reading in this series. And the last book we're gonna talk about is also something that I read in a reading vlog. Where's it at? Oh, here it is. It's under your butt, Winnie. Ruthless Vows by Rebecca Ross. This is the finale in a duology that starts with Divine Rivals. This book, I think, is still available on Kindle Unlimited last time I checked. This one was not, and so I had to buy it because I was so emotionally invested in this book. This book is starring Iris, who is a normal girl from humble beginnings who is vying for a job at this newspaper. There is one position open and 2 people competing for the position. The other person that is competing for this job is Kit Roman, and he comes from an affluent family, very, very wealthy beginnings. Now, these 2 people have a fun little banter rivalry going on. They really like to pick at each other. But the background of this story is there is a war happening, and the war is between 2 gods. Iris's brother is off at this war, and one night when Iris is feeling really down, she decides to write a letter to her brother. She types it up on her typewriter, but because she doesn't know where he is or how to get a letter to him, she just slips the letter in her wardrobe. Lo and behold, someone not only receives the letter, but they respond. And so we have a correspondence with a wardrobe. She doesn't know who she's writing to, and it evolves from there. This book had me in a chokehold. I was absolutely in love with this, and so I was excited to continue on. Here's what I will say. This was fine. I didn't love it as much as the first one, and upon reflection, I think as time goes on, I think I even like it less. And here's the nits I have to pick. Like in any fantasy series, the second book has to open up the world more. We have to get more answers. The stakes have to get bigger. But in this book, the charm and the magic of it was even though this was a fantasy world with big things at play, we are only dealing with 2 somewhat ordinary people that are just falling in love and doing ordinary things and trying to contribute to the war effort in any way possible. This opens up a little too much. The stakes become too high. We're introduced to a lot more factors going on. We learn more about the gods that are at war. And even though I felt like we spent a lot of time learning about the gods, not even really learning about them. They were such flat characters. I don't understand why they were doing what they were doing. And they just kind of show up and do the god stuff and then move on. I also think that our side characters and our main characters were made too important in the world, which sounds stupid when I say it out loud, but I think it lost the charm of these people being just ordinary people. This instead it fell down a lot of holes that I feel like felt a little too predictable. I also felt like the climax of this was really fast, and I did not understand all of the parts that were playing, all of the cogs that were turning were not really explain to you, and for it being such a big pinnacle moment in this world, it felt like it was over really fast and really conveniently. I didn't hate this. I liked it, but I think I'm disappointed in it because I liked this one so much. And the farther I get away from the time that I finish this, the less I like it. I think it's just a disappointment of the path it took and where it went from there. But I did finish another duology, so I'm proud of myself. But that, kids, is where we are going to end this recent reads. I feel like I flew through those pretty fast. I hope you got enough to know whether or not those books are worth you picking up, if there's something you're interested in. I've been doing really good with reading, and I'm kind of proud of myself. But if you had fun hanging out with me and the dogs, please subscribe. I hope you're reading good books out there, wherever you are, and I'll see you next time. Don't bark, Fergie.